Hello and welcome to this Regional Studies Association webinar. Today we're going to be looking at the grants and funding of the Regional Studies Association, and in particular we'll be looking at the Policy Expo grant. We've got two speakers with us, Neil Lee and Phil Tomlinson. I'll introduce them in a moment, but just a few minutes of housekeeping first. So welcome. The Regional Studies Association, for those of you that don't know us, is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development and policy. And we support our members through the latest research, access to research, funding schemes. We're going to talk about one of those today, networking and publishing opportunities. But more than that, we provide a space really for our members to grow both their research portfolios, but also their careers. As a response to the current global crisis, the RSA board have put in place a number of initiatives to support not only our members, but also the wider community. And those include this professional development webinar series, but also the Regions, Cities and Industry webinar series. And both of these are free for anybody in the world to access. We've set up a small grant scheme for the pandemic. We've already awarded the first 6 grants. I'll say a little bit more about the deadline for the next tranche of funding at the end of the webinar. And then finally, in June this year, we're running, helping to run a Regions in Recovery Global E-Festival with some key partners, including ESOP, LDNet, FinGeo and other organisations. And we will be taking papers for that, so please look that up on our website. All of the details are on our website. They're also all in our new app, which is called the RSA Hub, and which you can download for free from your app store. So in terms of housekeeping, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available to RSA members in the lounge on our website. And we do welcome you to be active participants in this session. So please introduce yourself to everybody who's here in the chat box, but ask your questions in the Q&A box. And now I'm going to move to introduce our two wonderful speakers. So kicking us off is Neil Lee from the London School of Economics. Neil is Professor of Economic Geography. I think it would be fair to say you're something of an econometrician. I hope that's fair to say. And recently he's been looking at high-tech growth benefits for low-skilled workers, inclusive growth and new forms of innovation policy. He's a particularly appropriate contributor to this, this meeting because before he became an academic, he was head of the Socio-Economic Centre at the Work Foundation, which is a very well-known think tank. Neil holds the policy portfolio on the Regional Studies Association board. And then our second speaker today is Phil Tomlinson. Phil is Professor of Industrial Strategy at the University of Bath. He's the Deputy Director of the Centre for Governance, Regulation and Industrial Strategy, but also works closely with the Institute for Policy Research. Phil is an extremely well-qualified speaker for this event because he's already had a Policy Expo grant and he's published his report, which I have a copy of it with me, on smart specialisation and lagging regions. And Phil is the editor of the book series in which we're publishing these policy outputs. So without any further ado, I think I'll ask you, Neil, if you can share your screen and we'll get started.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, Sally. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you all, and it's lovely to see in the contents or in the comments box that we have people from all around the world. It's great. So my name's Neil Lee. I'm the chair of the policy committee for the Regional Studies Association. Now, this is probably the easiest job in academia, I have to say, and that's partly because I get to take credit for a lot of the work which Sally and her team at the RSA do. And also when I'm not taking credit for their work, I'm taking credit for Phil's work in terms of sort of producing and sort of editing the sort of policy book series. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off, I'm going to kick off by doing about sort of 10 minutes on, my views about what makes a great policy expo. And I'm going to talk a bit about the Policy Expo's RSA scheme. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about sort of more generally about influencing policy from academia. And then I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's going to be talking more about the sort of specifics of the scheme and giving his own views on these topics as well. So, as you should all have seen, the RSA's Policy Expo grant scheme is open for applications. We have 3 really good topics. Now, the key thing here about the RSA Policy Expo scheme is that this is not a regular research grant scheme. This is something more than that, and I think actually something sort of rather better in many ways, or rather more interesting in many ways. Because what it is an opportunity to sort of influence policy. And in a sort of really fantastic way, because of the the fact you get to produce a book and you get to produce a sort of open access article as well. Now the key thing here is that there's sort of 3 things around the topics which we're looking for. The first is that they must be important. The second of all is that they must be current and topical, and the third is that they must be impactful. So we're looking for things which are important, current, and impactful. And if you read more on the guidelines in the handbook, you'll see that this is the way that we're sort of setting things up. Now, we have set, the deadline is 20th of April. We have set 3 themes for this year. First is pandemics, and obviously we don't mean how to cause pandemics. We mean the sort of regional resilience, regional policy responses. Hopefully you'll all agree that's quite a topical and quite an important topic at the moment. Second is social innovation, foundational sectors, and the regional economy. Social innovation, foundational sectors. These are hugely important policy agendas in many countries. And we're interested in sort of proposals for how regional studies research can sort of influence policymakers in these areas. And the third one is about the future of work, the gig economy, and inclusive growth. And what we're after here, we hear a lot about how technology is changing labour markets and how the gig economy has become a sort of an increasing, both an opportunity but also significantly a problem in many countries. And we also hear about challenges around sort of inclusive growth. So those are our sort of 3 topics for this grant scheme. Now, I've already suggested that an expo is not just another sort of regular grant. And, the reason it's called a policy expo is because it is sort of slightly, this is not just a sort of, basic research grant. The RSA does other things in that area. This is really to sort of help further our charitable aims of sort of influencing society. This is, we're all lucky that we work in an area where there are sort of, there are many opportunities to influence society and influence policymakers. So an expo is a comprehensive description or an explanation of an idea or theory. Now, the key thing here is that this is an opportunity to take, it might be an opportunity to take research which we already know or things we already know in our field and apply them to sort of influencing policymakers. Or it might be, that there may be a sort of element of sort of primary research involved in it. And often, and we would certainly ask you to involve the Regional Studies Association community as part of your proposal. But this is sort of slightly different. And, there's a sort of logic behind this, which is that we should not assume that policymakers know everything about their fields. We are the experts, and sometimes actually it's important to sort of to tell people about that. I should say I have to be a little bit careful when I talk about policymakers because my wife works for the UK government, and she's in the next room. So if I'm a little bit rude about policymakers, I may get a knock on the door. So there's conditions of the grant. So, this needs to be policy relevant. It needs to be international. So, clearly it needs to be policy relevant, but we're also interested in, international, by which I mean sort of interest to more than one territory, cross territory. It might be that you have a really great proposal which is of interest to a specific area. We're asking you to sort of say what the sort of broader implications are for other areas. We like involvement of sort of co-production of other sort of agencies or bodies involved in it. Team must include an early career researcher. It needs to involve bottom-up engagement with RSA members, and it can be summative. It can be sort of summarising existing research, as well as including primary research. Now, what makes a good policy expo? So we funded quite a number now, and they've been hugely successful. Phil's is there, but other stuff by sort of Andrew Beer and sort of one of my recent favourites was on the Belt and Road initiatives. This isn't just a sort of European scheme. Now these are, as I've suggested, these are important topics. They are current topics or topical topics, and they're all areas where policymakers need to learn and need to sort of be informed by the leading academic evidence. So these are all sort of good examples, and I would urge you before you have your before you put together a proposal, look, I would urge you regardless to go and have a look at the past policy expos, because there are excellent examples of regional studies research, but also have a look before you put in any proposal to this scheme. They're really they're great pieces of work, and you will see that this is an opportunity to do something which is slightly different and hopefully a bit more impactful than regular sort of academic research. So, with the caveat that my wife in the next room might come and sort of have a shout at me, here's a few things about what we think makes a good policy book. And I know Phil's going to talk more about this type of stuff. First thing is you can't assume prior knowledge. I mean, certainly in many countries, many countries, policymakers move from one brief to another pretty quickly. Of course, some will be experts, but many will not know, necessarily the sort of key. They won't necessarily know the background, and so it's really important that you sort of start from that perspective. Second thing, I'm sort of doing this in the wrong order, but second thing is that these are busy people, so make sure you keep it clear, short, and direct. It's useful to explain why the topic is important. It might be that for example, if you're doing the foundational economy, it might be that people are less aware of why this matters than you might be as a sort of academic in the field. Please explain why it's important and why they should be sort of concerned about it. And one thing which is hard to do, and we sometimes, it's hard to do, is provide solutions, help policymakers out. Andrew Beer's recent policy expos is a sort of great example of sort of providing ways of thinking for policymakers to help, tell them what the evidence says is a good way of sort of thinking about a problem or sort of solving it. Key statistics and examples, very useful in terms of helping make the case. I have a sort of, I should be careful what I say, but I know a senior British civil servant who says that if you go into a meeting with several statistics, then it really helps you make a case for something and can help you get stuff done. The same thing is true for academic research. Try and everything, I think it goes without saying, needs to be sort of evidence-based. And the final point here is that there's a crowded market. There's a lot of demand amongst policymakers to be influenced by sort of research, but there is a lot of research out there, and it's quite hard for them sometimes to sort of see the wood from the trees. And one of the great things about this grant is it gives you a really focused way of taking evidence and applying it to policy. So I mean, I don't want to sort of overstate this because Phil's going to be talking about this in a moment, but in terms of these sort of assessment criteria, I just urge you to have a very close look at the handbook, which is on our website. Have a look at the handbook, and it will give you some really good examples of the sort of assessment criteria and what we really want you to, the basis of which any funding decision is going to be made. Thank you. It was a really short. If I hand over now to Phil.
Thank you. What I want to talk about in the next 20 minutes, though, is how to actually deliver on the RSA Expo. Because as you'll see, the Expo grant and its expectations are perhaps slightly different from a standard grant scheme. So for instance, the Expo grant scheme, as Neil pointed out, is not necessarily about conducting new research per se, but as the term Expo implies, it's about bringing together a body of evidence, a body of work on a particular issue, and in this case, presenting it in a palatable form for policymakers. So you've been informed by the Regional Studies Association that you've been awarded one of these RSA Policy Expo grants. Congratulations. These grants are highly competitive and are much sought after. So you and your team have done really well to win one of these grants. But what have you let yourself in for? And what's expected of you? Let's spend a few minutes finding out. The first to note is the grant is for 18 months, and that clock starts ticking almost as soon as you have the award letter. So you've got to be ready to work on the project straight away. And the RSA does have a set of expectations which from this slide might look a little cumbersome or heavy, but actually they're geared to helping you to deliver a strong policy-facing piece of work. So you're a team of 5. That includes 1 early career researcher or at least 1 early career researcher and at least 1 researcher based in a different country from where you are. First of all, you need to elect a chair to lead the expo and who will liaise closely with the RSA office throughout the lifetime of the grant. The project itself, while it answers a specific call, and at the moment we've got 3 themes under the current call, as Neil said, they should be global in scope. Your analysis should seek to explore the phenomena, the policy phenomena in different spatial contexts. And so it shouldn't be just about a policy issue in a particular country, but it should cross different national boundaries. But obviously it has to have a spatial focus. And in conducting your analysis, you should be prepared to engage with existing and new communities, and this will include Regional Studies Association members and policymakers. You have to issue a call for evidence, and you'll compile an evidence base from a range of sources, including the academic, policy, web, and so-called grey literatures. And you also issue this call for evidence from the RSA community and wider stakeholders. So this can include running focus groups and special workshops and webinar sessions as we currently do at the moment with the RSA at conferences, in particular Regional Studies Association conferences and at other international and national events and forums. You may also hold online focus groups and engage communities through innovative uses of social media. A very successful example of a workshop was one at the RSA conference in Santiago de Costa a couple of years ago with Andrew Beer and Sarah Ayres with their expo. They ran a very successful and quite innovative focus group which engaged with the RSA members and people who attended the conference for their expo on place-based policy, and it was very interactive, very interesting for all involved, and they got some really good data out of that session. Now, the key outputs are, of course, the policy-facing book that must be delivered at the end of the grant. Okay, that's probably the main output, but you're also required to produce an academic paper for consideration for publication in regional studies and regional science. And this paper can actually be delivered up to a year after the grant ends. But the key one is read the policy-facing book. And finally, you should be prepared to work closely with the RSA office and the publisher team with the book launch and the promotion of the book through social media, blogs, etc., and maybe, as I say, a public book launch. So, as Sally mentioned in the introduction, I led the very first RSA Expo team. We won the grant in 2017, and it ran through until the end of 2018. And this is the team on the right. 2 of us at Bath, 3 of us now at Bath. Carlo Corradini, Sandrine Labori, Felicia Fay, and Maria Chiara Bizzotto. Obviously, as the first team to win the Expo grant, this was a bit of a trip into the unknown for us, and also a bit of a trip into the unknown for the RSA, because no one really knew how to do it and the type of outputs we would actually deliver, especially the policy-facing book. Sally Hardy gave us a clear steer on what she kind of expected, and she did provide us with a couple of examples of policy reports by social scientists in other fields to give us a taste or a flavour of what we might produce. But even so, the process was very experimental, and it is fair to say it kind of evolved over time. Obviously, Sally and the RSA were very happy with our final outputs. This is the book here. This is the paper that was published in 2020 in RSRS. And Sally was very happy with the way in which we produced the book, so much so that she asked me to become the first overseen policy impact book series editor. So in the subsequent books that have appeared, there's likely to be a bit of path dependency built in, and that may evolve as we go through with future books in future Expo cycles. In terms of the format of the book, there are a few things to note. The first is the book is short. It's 30,000 words maximum. Now, it can be either solely authored by the Expo team, or it can be an edited book in which you can include chapters from other academics not on the grant and or policymakers. And this is what we did. We opted for a policy facing book, which is an edited book, bringing in some top authors from across academia and from policy. Now, it has to be written, as Neil was mentioning, in a format that is policy facing, in a policy friendly way, in a way that avoids as much as possible academic jargon. And that can be a challenge. So in our book, we had some chapters sent in from some truly world-leading economic geographers, which was great. We got them on board. But when they, I think it's fair to say, when they submitted their chapters, they tended to write in a traditional academic way and academic tone, which was not really suitable for a policy audience. Now, as editors of the book, as holders of the grant, we didn't think it was fair to send these chapters back to our authors. We were really grateful they would contribute to the book. But as a team, we had to carefully edit each chapter and redraft sentences and paragraphs so that chapters suited the book style to make it more policy sort of friendly, cut out some of the jargon. Now, in the book, you're encouraged to include case studies, which you can put in a box case study, and to include good infographics, visuals, and critically identify the policy challenges and solutions as you do so. You're expected to have an executive summary and also possibly to source a forward from a leading academic or a leading policymaker. I mentioned that you should try and avoid as much jargon as possible, but sometimes you may need to use technical terms. So we included a glossary of key terms at the end of the book, which I think was very useful, went down very well. And in some places in the book, you can include explainer boxes to outline core concepts. Finally, you'll note that each chapter has its own color code, which is quite nice and seems to work very well. So each chapter, is a different color, and it, so the first chapter in our book was red, and then it went to blue, and then a lighter blue, then to pink, and so on. And we ended up on green. And this really gives it a nice, easy feel for policymakers and for readers as they go through the book. So this is an example of the type of book stylistics. If you're an RSA member, you will receive the first 4 books from the series, so you probably have a feel for what they look like. But if you glance through them, you'll notice that they make use of certain stylistics, which I described on the previous page. The use of box case studies, for example here, a glossary, explainer boxes, and so on. The thing to remember is this book is not an academic tome, but it is not a textbook either. Okay, it's not like a textbook, it's not a substantive academic tome, but it is designed for a policy-facing audience and those interested in policy issues. So it's something that they can dip into and dip out to in their own time, and they can pick up on issues that you highlight in the book. So it's kind of seen as an easy read for people who are busy, people who are going to be making key decisions or want to think about an issue which they may want to start formulating policy around. I'll probably move a bit more onto some reflections from our Expo grant experience. And here we are with some of the key project outputs which we delivered. So we worked closely with the RSA Expo over the 2 years, or the 18 months that we had the grant for. First, we worked closely with them to arrange a workshop at the RSA Winter Conference in London 2017, where we engaged with some of our key RSA members and some wider policymakers who happened to attend that conference. And then we also worked with the RSA office to secure a special session at the EU Smarter Conference in Seville in 2018, and also a special session at the European Union Week of Regions and Cities in Brussels in 2018. We use these events to promote the project and to engage with key stakeholders. In terms of the outputs, well, we delivered on the book on time, eventually on time, and also the regional studies, regional science paper. But we also found space to undertake some new research, and we got a paper published in the Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economy and Society, which we were very, very happy about. So, we were delighted with this because we were a completely new team that we'd never worked before. So we'd actually got a number of key outputs, and we continue, even post-grant, we continue to work on several other projects. So it's brought us together. The book itself, again, we worked closely with the RSA office to secure this, but it was officially launched at the European Union's Joint Research Centre in Seville on the 26th of September 2019. We had a great audience, and of course we benefited from the JRC hosting a conference at the same time. And here are some photos of the event. So we launched the book with a short presentation, then we had a panel discussion, and we also had one of our authors in the book, Raquel Ortega-Giles, who happened to be at the conference, and she sat on the panel with us. So that was great as well. Some key tips about the whole process. I think, first of all, remember you've only got 18 months, so planning and organisation are important. And at an early stage, you should coordinate your team and allocate tasks appropriately. Perhaps an early brainstorming session can be particularly useful in identifying the core focus of the project and setting aims and deadlines. And it is important to keep an eye on the project timetable and update it if necessary as the project goes on. You tend to start with these things with a clear plan, then you face the reality of unexpected constraints and new opportunities. So your timetable and milestones need to be dynamic. Secondly, I have to really re-emphasize this, liaise closely with Sally and the team at the RSA office from an early stage, because throughout the project, they're very helpful and very flexible, and they can open a lot of doors for you. Third, keep in mind the policy audience, engagement and impact. As academics, we tend to forget this, but it's critical to this scheme. So keep in mind who your key audience is going to be. Fourth, when you get to draft the book, well, this is where you get to work with the RSA Policy Impact Book Series editor, which is currently me. As editor, I see the first draft, and I will liaise with you on whether it meets the requirements, and particularly in terms of format and whether it's policy facing enough, whether it's palatable for policymakers. And so I may send it back if it comes back as a typical academic book, which is, written in an academic form. I may send it back and say, hang on, you need some more boxes here, more case studies, etc., etc. So I'll be there as a critical friend in helping you in drafting that book. And I think Neil also takes a look at that as well. So you do get good feedback from us, hopefully, to get this book turned around and get it out in a format that we really want it to look like. Benefits of the scheme. Well, for a small grant, I can personally testify that it really punches beyond its weight. First of all, it's a grant success. So for some of us on our team, it was our first ever grant success. And it indirectly led us to getting further and bigger grant successes. And that is obviously important for our own CVs and our own reputation. Second, it can bring a new team together. So it's an opportunity to build new interdisciplinary research collaborations. And for young scholars, it's an opportunity to work with established researchers, and also vice versa, because often younger scholars can bring in new methodological techniques, new skills that older researchers or more established researchers can benefit from as well. So this can benefit everybody in the team. This collaboration may well extend into the future. It certainly has in our case. Third, in terms of impact, a lot of our research is about engagement and impact these days. Universities are now pushing us to be more impactful and produce research that has policy impact. And this grant and the RSA can provide you with a great opportunity to showcase your work to a wider policy audience and establish policy connections that, again, can extend beyond the lifetime of the grant. So this is a real opportunity to really showcase your work and to open new doors for you. For, of course, in putting the book together, you'll be writing for a policy audience. And for many of you, that may well involve developing a new and much needed skill. So you're enhancing your skill set. 5, the whole experience gives you wider exposure and impact of research, not only to the policy community, but also across the RSA. So after all, every RSA member will receive a free copy of the book. And if you think of the typical circulation of an academic book, which is in the hundreds, well, this book, the circulation is several times wider than that. And obviously you get your name out amongst the RSA community. That may lead to future collaborations, possibly getting invited to go on other grant applications, etc. Finally, it's a great experience and a lot of fun. We really enjoyed our experience. We really enjoyed working closely with Sally and the team at the RSA. The door they opened for us in Westminster, in the regions, and in Europe as well. So that was really great. We enjoyed it a lot, and we built many new friendships from the grant as well. So it really is a great grant to be involved with, a great scheme to be involved with. So I think I'm pretty much done. We might have some time for questions. Thanks for listening, and that's where you can contact me.
Thank you very much, Phil. Do you want to take off your screen share? Thank you. Thank you. That was really wonderful. Thank you both. I think you've managed to give a very clear explanation of what the grant application process looks like and how that then comes through to the dissemination of it through the Policy Expo book. Quite a number of questions have been coming up in the Q&A box. I've already answered 4 of them, but for the benefit of people that haven't seen them come up, because they're a bit technical, I thought I'd help you out. The real tenor of them is, do you need to be a member of the RSA in order to apply for the grant? And the answer to that is yes. The next question was, do all of the co-applicants need to be members of the RSA? And the answer to that is yes. But in saying that, I would remind you that we price our membership both by career stage, but also by geography. So if you're an early career researcher in India or China, you would pay less than an early career researcher in America or Germany or France. So have a look at the website for membership pricing. You might find that it costs you a bit less than you expected. The next question, and there were a couple of questions around this, was on team size. We're not prescriptive about the number of people in the team. Other than that, you have to have an early career researcher. So there were 5 in Phil's team, and I think the application form has 5 boxes on it. But if you really wanted to have 6 of you doing it, that wouldn't be a problem. If you only want to have 4 of you doing it, that's also not a problem. So read the handbook as Neil directed you, and I think you'll find that sets out the rules of the scheme quite clearly. That leaves us with a growing number of questions in the coming up in the Q&A, and I'm going to take some of them out of order. And the first one is I'm going to take is by Ruggero, which is I'm going to direct to Neil. And it's about the application process for the Policy Expo grant. And I think what the question really relates to is, what's the difference between an application to the Policy Expo scheme to a normal research grant application?
Thank you. I mean, so this is a great question, and I think it really allows us to sort of say, to reiterate again why the Policy Expo is sort of slightly different, and that this is about, impactful research. It's not necessarily about the sort of the most innovative new methodology which will sort of tell us about something about theory. This is about research which can be research which is, it can be summative, it can be about research which has already been done. But the key thing we're looking for here is something which is going to impact society in some way. That's our sort of principal sort of rationale there for this scheme. And so, that's the sort of, that's the underpinning thought behind this. Now, in terms of what's evaluated positively in the proposal, I mean, we're really asking you to persuade us that is the case, that this research is going to have some sort of impact. There's lots of other schemes which you could apply for sort of, basic, which people can apply for research funding. So just, bear that in mind. And then as I kind of gave you a sort of three 3 points around, we want something which is topical, we want something which is sort of impactful, and we want something which is sort of important as well. And all those 3 things are sort of important, things we're going to be looking for, along with some of the more generic stuff about proposals, making sure that, we think what you're doing is deliverable, being convinced that your team's going to work, and all that sort of stuff. So that's, I think, what makes it sort of slightly different to a normal grant. And that's the type of thing we'll be looking for in the proposals.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. I'm going to direct the next question to you, Phil, in a spirit of sharing. And the question comes from Chandrima, who's qualifying or clarifying that the proposal must include cases from more than one place. So talking about the geographical scale and scope of the policy question.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is to have wide appeal with the project. You're producing a book which is going to go to RSA members across the world. I think there's about, the circulation's around 3,000. I think, Sally, if you can correct me on that. So and you will have a member of your team will be located in a different country to where you are located. So that kind of naturally thinks, well, actually, if you're looking at an issue, if it's about pandemics, if it's about social innovation, which are the current themes, there must be something going. These are generic issues that we put out in the call there that apply not just to one particular territory, but to several territories, almost all territories. So we'd like to get some context about how these issues are affecting different territories and what are the likely policy response in those territories, what are the policy lessons from different policy territories, but different spatial regions, to inform better policy making. So I think that's key really with bringing in case studies, and these case studies don't have to be, are not kind of in-depth new research as such. They're just kind of exploratory to see what's gone on in the particular regions in different I think we had a chapter, for instance, in our book where we were talking about cooperation between regions. We had a case study in south of Italy, in Puglia, and we had a case study in Cornwall. And they sat at the side in the same chapter. They were only box cases of around 400 or 500 words. It was just describing what was happening and the process in which firms were encouraged to get together on particular European Union projects to cooperate in terms of innovation and sharing technologies, etc., and how they experienced that. So it's kind of, it wasn't completely in depth. We didn't go out and conduct a whole set of in-depth 30 interviews in each case as such. We gathered information that was already out there. We conducted a few interviews in each case and just put that together and put that in our chapter. And it gave us a different, it now just to put different perspectives on that particular issue that we were looking at. So yeah, we are looking for some comparison between regions and their experience of the issue under investigation and the policy response. And I think that really substantiates the book, really.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can use these grants as an opportunity to it forces you in a way to build on your networks. And I think that is one of the things that has made this grant scheme quite popular. Thank you, Phil.
I think it's policy learning. That's you're learning from different regions.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a couple of technical questions that have come through that I might quickly pick off, if that's okay with the speakers. So the first is by Kazi Fattar, who's asking, can I apply for a project that I've already started, which is very relevant to one of the grant areas? And my answer to that would be yes, you can, because as Neil made clear in his slides at the beginning, the Policy Expo grants can include summative projects. So if you've already done a piece of work and you've got the results, you can use this grant as a way of managing the dissemination and the policy impact of that work that you've already done. I would caution you against applying for this and the grant that you're getting the results from at the same time, because obviously you won't get this. So yes, you can apply for the grant, but you would need to be very sure that the results were available to you at the time that you were doing that. So that's one question. Given that I have an ill-timed delivery, I might throw to Neil a question from Alison Odenthal, which is, what are the key challenges to working effectively with policymakers and vice versa?
Okay, thank you. So I mean, I would say there are sort of easy challenges to address and hard challenges. And the easy challenges are things which I think you can learn, and I think we would sort of certainly work with you as part of this scheme to sort of give you the skills to address. So this is things such as, you know, communication, making sure, you know, your writing is clear and you include sort of background, the type of things Phil was talking about actually when he was talking about his glossary of terms, stuff like that, which, you know, you can get out of the way pretty easily. But then there's harder things as well. And I think, you know, these can often be sort of a little bit, you know, these are obviously a little bit more difficult. So we talk, you know, one problem we've seen is the sort of, you know, in the context of certain amounts of sort of instability in certain countries, we have seen it so that policymakers don't necessarily have the capacity or the time to, you know, listen to evidence. That's been sort of problematic. And there's been sort of problems also associated with, so associated with sort of state capacity. And, you know, there's ways of getting around these issues to sort of try and achieve some sort of impact. I mean, civil servants tend to be very open to discussing things, and there's different ways in which you can sort of frame what you're doing to try and make it, you know, try and make it appeal to sort of different groups of policymakers. Then the other thing I'd always say at this point, right, is we talk about policymakers as being this sort of homogenous whole, but actually there's a wide variety of different types of policymakers, and we're lucky in a sense because we can also deal with, you know, we often deal with regional and local policymakers who often have capacities over, you know, capacities to be influenced over certain areas of policy which national governments would find it harder to sort of deal with. So, I mean, you know, one of the things I would say there is that, you know, you need to be kind of specific about the type of people you want to influence and how you're going to influence them. And of course, one of the great things about this, you know, the RSA, the scheme, is that it gives you a sort of impetus to get out there and talk to different types of policymakers. And it also helps build capacity to do so as well.
Thank you very much, Neil, for that answer, and apologies to everybody. It's the peril of working from home, and my office is at the front on the ground floor of my house. I'm going to just address two quick technical questions that have come up that are related in the question feed around the engagement with early career researchers. So you do have to have an early career researcher who is an RSA member as part of your application. That is clear, and we will not fund grants that do not have that criteria met. And the reason for that is that it's part of the association's commitment to capacity building. It's a way of giving early careers a lift in order that they can get involved in a research project. It gives them it's a stepping stone to their career success, which was a point that I think Phil made very effectively in one of his answers. And then the second related question is from Lorenzo, who's asking if it's possible to involve a non-academic early career researcher, for example, a graduate student who works outside academia. And the answer to that would be yes, that is possible. And in fact, it's possible to involve policymakers as part of your application team, but the money has to go into a higher education institution. So it can't go to a policy organisation, it must go to a higher education institution. But provided the early career was a member, there would be no problem with that. So I hope that that's clear. Now, let me give you let me deal with one quick related question, which is, what is the RSA's definition of an early career researcher? It's somebody that is within 5 years of the date of their PhD certificate or equivalent. So if it's not somebody with a PhD, they might have done 5 years in a field-related job, and it's up to you then to make the case for why that person would qualify as an early career researcher for us. Another question from Chandrima is, what happens if one of your members change affiliation during the grant? that would be no problem. RSA grants are portable with the individuals that hold them, and most institutions would release the money if that person is the principal investigator, and the money would follow the principal investigator. So that's not a problem. But it's not possible to apply as a freelance researcher if you are going to be the principal investigator and carry the money, because the money has to go to a higher education institution and we can't compromise on that. So if you're a freelance researcher, you can certainly apply as part of the team, but you cannot be the person that holds the budget. So I hope that that's clear. Let me ask a question from Lexi Holmes. Let me put it to both of you. Shortish answers, please. I'll start with you, Phil. The question is, what are the blockers for early career researchers in doing policy-related research? Why should an early career researcher do it rather than just work on their academic publications? Let me ask you to have a quick go at that.
Okay, well, I think the key blockers is access to policymakers, because you, as an early career researcher, you don't necessarily have the reputation, you haven't established reputation or established your networks to get access to policymakers, and also you may have a lack of confidence approaching policymakers. So I think that's one of the key blockers I would say, and I think working with an established researcher, but most importantly working with the RSA office, to be honest, opens a lot of doors, because I know the RSA in Brighton and also RSA Europe have got their foot through those doors very successfully over the years, and that is a great way in to get your name known. Why I think they should be in it? One, I think it's more interesting. To be honest, I think the reason I did research is if for me, if the research doesn't have any implication for policy, I'm personally not that interested. But also, if you look at where the direction of travel is going in terms of funding and in terms of the pressure from governments and etc., certainly in the UK, but also across Europe and elsewhere, the direction of travel is they want research with impact. And if you can demonstrate that your work has got impact and it's policy impact, that doing work not is only more exciting, more interesting, but it's going to give you a big foot up the ladder, really. Thank
you, Phil. Before you give all the answer, let me just see if Neil has anything that he'd like to add to that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say there's sort of three main reasons for me. The first is that employers value it. I mean, I was asked a question in my LSE, I joined LSE 7 years ago, and I was asked a question about, tell me about your policy impact and your sort of approach to that. Second thing is that, I always find that my ideas for good academic research come from policy. So lots of my best, with the sort of, myself regarded best papers come from sort of a view of sort of, come from ideas from talking to policymakers. So I think there's a sort of synergistic thing there. But my third thing is we're blessed to be working in a field which is really interesting, but also can have an impact. And it seems like, why do we study these incredible issues unless we want to have some sort of positive societal impact? And I think that's, that for me is the sort of fundamental reason for doing it.
Thank you. I think that's very clear and very right. It's certainly the reason that I've stayed with Regional Studies Association for 34 years, is that it sits at that interstices between research and policy, and that you're working on the side of the good. You're actually making a positive difference to citizens' lives. We've had a couple of questions, one of which one of my colleagues has answered around maternity leave. And although it's been answered online, I just want to make it clear that the RSA understands that women become pregnant, and the RSA makes appropriate allowances for that circumstance. So if you're a woman and you become pregnant, you can always email us and we will accommodate that. That is not a problem. There's a question from Eleanor about the success rate that I'd like to say something about, but then I have a closing question that I would like to put to both of our speakers. We will overrun by 3 or 4 minutes because of that closing question. I apologise for that. But to address Eleanor's question about the success rate, Obviously it varies because we never know how many people will apply in each of the categories for the grant. But what I can say to you is that the RSA grants, because they are field specific, they tend to have fewer applications per grant available than national schemes. So in terms of the numbers, you would stand a better chance statistically, probably, applying for an RSA grant. But you should never, ever underestimate the quality of the grants that we receive. And they go through a rigorous program, and our grant, I mean, Neil and Phil are here today, but our other grants, with deadlines coming up, are assessed by our research committee, which is chaired by Professor Ron Boschma. In the past, those chairs have included Jamie Peck and Henry Young. So it is about quality, not just about, you know, do I stand a chance? Yes, of course you stand a chance, but you need to make those meet those quality thresholds. So it's not an easy win, I would say. And then I'd like to finish with a question to both of you, a more sort of polemical question maybe, and certainly something that I'm interested to know in. And I'm going to split it to Neil. I'm going to ask, what more do you think higher education and other institutions could do to support researchers taking on policy work? So what are the institutional blockers? And to Phil, I'm going to ask, what could the RSA do? What could we do actually in practice to make a difference to research in the field? And I'll start with Neil.
So in terms of what institutions can do, I would say, or what the sort of institutional blockers are, you know, there is still a perception, I think, sometimes amongst some senior staff that academic research is not policy focused. And I think that is changing, and I think things are changing over time, and certainly in some institutions, such as my own, there's now like a much bigger assessment, you know, a much bigger, much stronger emphasis placed on policy work. So I'd say that's one of the first things. I think the second thing is time, right? You know, that actually building long-term relationships with policymakers takes quite a long time, and I think institutions can do more to sort of try and embed that into the sort of academic, you know, the academic lives essentially, and that we really are incredibly pushed for time. There are many sort of competing you know, uses of our time, and actually just having some more focus on that would, I think, be very useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can absolutely see that watching colleagues trying to juggle it. And Phil, so what's my agenda for the next 12 months?
Okay, just want to add on what Neil was saying actually, and something like the University of Bath is doing through its Institute for Policy Research. I think given there's an increased emphasis on impact and policy engagement these days, what the Institute for Policy Research are doing at Bath for PhD students and early career researchers is organising secondments with policy think tanks and policymakers. So we have secondments in Whitehall, for instance, with several government departments. So probably Neil's wife might have come across some of our secondees, and certainly my PhD student has benefited. He had a secondment at Treasury, and then secondly, another one at the Innovate UK. So I think things are changing, and those secondments can be very useful. In terms of the RSA, I think, you know, you were doing a great job already. What you're already doing with RSA and RSA Europe, you've got your foot in the door. You have done for many, many years, engaging with policymakers. And, you know, if you think about all the conferences we go to, there's often a space in those conferences for the main address for a policymaker to be on the platform, on the key platform. So that's important. You're certainly very strong in the UK on policy and in the European Union, the continental Europe. Perhaps looking further afield, you might want to push the boundaries a bit more with your regional divisions in Latin America and in China. And other countries. So obviously we've just had an Expo book come out on the Belt Road, and you know, the author there, Zhiming Jing, was you know, did a really great book launch with the book, which got well, you know the figures, you know, so that's an example. So pushing it forward with other divisions and getting footholds in terms of policy with policymakers further afield is perhaps
really helpful. I'm going to stop you there before you add anything else to my agenda. So, but yes, thank you very much. We could certainly work more closely with our sections and divisions internationally. I think that's a very well made point. And Xiangming Chen did indeed do an absolutely splendid job promoting his book within the series, which is the most recent book that's come out in the series. And on that cheerful and positive note, I'd like to begin to wrap up today's meeting. But before I do that, I just want to give you some important news about our some of our grant deadlines. So if you decide not to go for the Policy Expo grant, you could go for the Pandemic Small Grants Scheme. The deadline for that is on the 30th of June of this year. We have a members grant for members of the RSA and also for fellows of the RSA, two different grant schemes, and the deadlines for submission of the applications for them is the 1st of September. And then finally, we have our early career grant scheme, and the deadline for submission for that is the 15th of September. And all the details and all the supporting details that you could ever possibly want are on the Regional Studies Association website. I can tell you that for this year, we've postponed the Research Network and Travel Grant that we make available, obviously because of the pandemic, and it's that money that's been repurposed to support the small grant schemes. So on that cheery note, I would like to thank very much Neil Lee and Phil Tomlinson for preparing their presentations and for so expertly delivering them and generously answering the questions. I'd like to thank my colleagues, both Katarina Berger and Alex Holmes, for their work in hosting this series and managing the tech for the series. But particularly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and for engaging so actively through the questions. It's been a real pleasure to take part in this webinar, and I hope that very many of you will apply for one of our grants, if not for this one, for one of the other grants that we offer. Thank you very much and have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.